A billionaire father thought he could control everything until watched a waitress crawl on the floor with his son and realized some lessons money can't buy. Alexander Grant was a man who had everything money could buy. His office overlooked the city from the top floor of a glass tower. His cars gleamed in the driveway like polished jewels, and his suits always smelled of fine leather and luxury cologne. People respected him, more feared him, wherever he went. But there was one thing Alexander could never seem to control completely: his young son. Ethan. Ethan was a bright, curious little boy with a mop of unruly brown hair and eyes that sparkled with mischief. Unlike his father, he didn't care about brands or status or being seen in the right place at the right time. He wanted to explore, touch, play, and ask a million questions about everything he saw. Alexander, who had always lived by schedules and rules, often felt frustrated with Ethan's energy. He wanted him to learn discipline, manners, and respect for appearances, things he believed were necessary for survival in a world of wealth and power. One sunny afternoon, Alexander decided it was time to take Ethan out for a proper lunch. Not a casual meal at home, not a quick snack, but a real fancy restaurant. One of those places where the napkins were crisp, the silverware gleamed, and people wore suits and dresses even to eat a sandwich. Alexander thought it would be the perfect chance to teach Ethan how to behave like a gentleman. He wanted him to sit properly, speak politely, follow the unspoken rules that seemed to govern such places. Ethan, however, had different ideas. As soon as they entered the restaurant, his eyes widened at the shiny floor, towering chairs and the rows of glimmering lights. He ran a little ahead, tugging on Alexander's hand, asking questions about the paintings on the walls and the funny shapes of the silver cutlery. Alexander's lips tightened. He had hoped Ethan would remain calm and quiet, but it seemed Ethan had no intention of listening. They were seated at a corner table, overlooking the restaurant's central area. A waitress approached Mia, a young woman with a kind smile and an easy laugh. She was dressed in a simple uniform, but there was something magnetic about her presence. She knelt slightly to greet Ethan, making him giggle immediately. Alexander watched carefully, his arms crossed, ready to remind Ethan to behave. As the waiter placed the menus on the table, Ethan's attention drifted to a small toy car he had brought along. It slipped from his hands and rolled under the table, disappearing into the shadows. Without hesitation, Mia crouched down and then, to Alexander's astonishment, she started crawling across the floor to retrieve it. She did not move awkwardly or look embarrassed. She was completely focused on Ethan, speaking to him as she moved, making funny noises and keeping his attention. Ethan erupted into laughter, clapping his hands and begging her to do it again. Alexander froze. His mind raced. Was this how he wanted his son to be treated in public? Crawling on the floor, laughing like a child, drawing attention from everyone in the restaurant? It was chaotic. It was unrefined. And yet, as he watched Ethan's face light up with pure joy, a small, unfamiliar feeling stirred inside him, a mixture of awe and curiosity. Ethan, sensing his father's surprise, leaned forward eagerly. "Do it again, please," he shouted, clapping. Mia chuckled and made a little crawling circle back toward him, pretending to get stuck and then wriggling free. Ethan's laughter grew louder, echoing across the restaurant. Other diners glanced their way, some smiling at the sight of the playful scene. Alexander felt his face heat up, half embarrassed, half captivated. He realized something he hadn't considered before. In his world, success was measured by appearances, by control, by rules. But Ethan was teaching him something entirely different in this small, unexpected moment. Joy, curiosity, and trust didn't require manners or social status. They required attention, care, and willingness to be present in the moment. Mia had instinctively understood this. She didn't see Ethan as a little boy to correct or control. She saw him as a person who wanted to connect and play. Alexander tried to regain his composure, straightening in his chair and clearing his throat. "Ethan," he said firmly, "sit properly. That's enough crawling." Ethan looked up at him with wide eyes, disappointment flickering across his face. "But Dad, she's helping me play." Mia paused, still on the floor, and looked at Alexander. Her smile was gentle but firm. "It's okay," she said softly. "Children learn and explore through play. He's safe, and he's having fun." Alexander's chest tightened. He wanted to argue, to insist on discipline, but something in Mia's calm, confident presence made him hesitate. She wasn't challenging him. She was simply showing a different way to connect with a child. Ethan's laughter rang out again, and for the first time, Alexander noticed how little he had laughed with his son in months, maybe even years. As the lunch progressed, Ethan continued to interact with Mia, crawling under the table, asking questions, and playing small games she invented on the spot. Alexander found himself watching quietly, sometimes frowning, sometimes surprised, and occasionally even smiling when Ethan's laughter was too infectious to ignore. It was a strange, almost unsettling experience for him. He was used to controlling outcomes, shaping environments, and maintaining appearances. Here he was powerless to enforce his rules. Yet the scene was filled with a kind of order he hadn't recognized before, the order of joy, connection, and genuine attention. By the time the meal arrived, Alexander's mind was buzzing with thoughts he didn't fully understand. He saw Mia move seamlessly between serving other tables and playing with Ethan, treating everyone with respect and care. He realized that wealth and power could never teach the kind of lessons Mia was giving freely. Just by being present, playful, and empathetic, Ethan finished his lunch smiling. And Alexander felt a strange warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. As they prepared to leave, Ethan hugged Mia tightly, thanking her for playing with him. Alexander found himself saying, almost unconsciously, "Thank you, too." Mia's smile lingered, not just at Ethan, but at Alexander as well, as if acknowledging that even someone like him could learn something new. As they walked out of the restaurant, Alexander remained quiet. Ethan skipped ahead, chatting about all the funny things Mia had done. Alexander realized that today had been more than just a lunch. It had been a small window into a different kind of life. A life where joy, empathy, and play mattered more than rules, appearances, or wealth. For the first time, he wondered if he had been focusing on the wrong lessons for his son. Maybe control and discipline weren't the only things that mattered. Maybe laughter, connection, and presence were just as important. And maybe, just maybe, Mia had shown him a path he hadn't known existed, a path that could change his relationship with Ethan forever. After that unforgettable lunch, Alexander could not stop thinking about what had happened. The image of Ethan laughing on the restaurant floor, with Mia crawling alongside him, kept replaying in his mind. He tried to focus on work, on meetings, on deals. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw his son's bright smile and Mia's calm, joyful presence. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The next morning, Alexander found himself unusually quiet as he prepared for work. Ethan bounced around the house, full of energy, eager to recount the games he had played with Mia. "Dad, she's the funniest," Ethan said, holding a small paper crown Mia had made for him during lunch. "She even crawled like a puppy to get my car. And we played hide-and-seek under the table." Alexander forced a smile. He wanted to be proud, to correct any improper behavior, to remind Ethan that manners and order mattered. But instead, he felt something strange, a deep curiosity about the world his son was experiencing. He realized he had spent so much time teaching Ethan rules and discipline that he had almost forgotten how to see the world through a child's eyes. Later that week, Alexander tried to return to his usual routine, but Ethan was different now. The lunch had awakened something in him, a sense of confidence, of joy, of freedom to explore. At breakfast, Ethan insisted on playing little games while eating, spinning his spoon in the cereal bowl, stacking toast slices into tiny towers, and giggling whenever something fell over. Alexander felt a mix of irritation and wonder. He knew he wanted to teach Ethan self-control, yet he couldn't deny that the boy seemed happier, brighter, more alive at school. Ethan talked non-stop about Mia. "She's amazing, Dad. She talks to me like I'm important, and she knows how to make everyone laugh. I want to be like her." Alexander listened, quietly processing his son's words. He felt a twinge of guilt. How much had he been ignoring Ethan's feelings in his constant drive to control? Later that afternoon, Alexander had a chance to reflect while driving home from work. He remembered Mia's actions at the restaurant, her laughter, her gentle guidance, her patience. He realized she had taught Ethan something more valuable than rules or etiquette. She had shown him joy, connection, and empathy. Alexander had always believed that wealth and power could protect his son, give him everything he needed. But Mia had reminded him that some things, like love, laughter, and attention, could not be bought. When they arrived home, Ethan ran straight to his room to play. But Alexander noticed him stopping to help a neighbor's kitten stuck on the fence. Ethan gently coaxed the frightened animal down, mimicking Mia's calm and careful approach. Alexander paused, amazed at how much influence a single encounter could have on a child. Mia had modeled empathy and playfulness, and Ethan had absorbed it naturally. That evening, Alexander sat in his study, watching Ethan build a small castle out of blocks. He realized how much he had missed during the boy's early years, moments of curiosity, imagination, and simple wonder. Alexander had always been too focused on achievements, schedules, and perfection. He had never paused to see life through Ethan's eyes. Mia had done that even for a few hours, and the change in Ethan was undeniable. The next day, Alexander decided to observe Ethan more closely. He noticed the little ways his son imitated Mia, speaking kindly to his toys, offering imaginary snacks, and making silly faces just to make someone laugh. Ethan's world was filled with exploration and joy. And Alexander began to understand that these experiences were as important as any lesson in discipline or manners. Alexander started experimenting. At first, he felt awkward. He tried bending down to Ethan's level while reading a story, letting the boy hold the book upside down and laugh at the pictures. He joined Ethan in building a tower of blocks, allowing it to topple without frustration. At dinner, he let Ethan pour his own drink, even though a small spill was inevitable. Each time, Alexander felt a strange mixture of discomfort and happiness. He was letting go of control, and in return, he felt closer to his son than ever before. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to talk about Mia. She said the best way to learn is to play and explore, he told his father. She said, I'm smart, and I'm funny, and I can do anything if I try. Alexander nodded silently, realizing that Mia's influence was shaping Ethan in ways no lecture or rule could. She was teaching him confidence, kindness, and the courage to be himself. Alexander's colleagues at work noticed a subtle change in him as well. He seemed less rigid in meetings, more patient with his staff, and occasionally even smiled at things he would have previously ignored. He realized that observing and valuing genuine human connection, like Mia's interaction with Ethan, had shifted something within him. It was a small but powerful transformation. One afternoon, Alexander found himself thinking about returning to the restaurant to speak with Mia. He wasn't sure why, he didn't even know her well, but he felt a need to acknowledge her impact. He realized it wasn't just about gratitude. It was about understanding that the lessons she taught Ethan could also teach him. Wealth and control had their place, but they were meaningless without empathy, patience, and love. Ethan, of course, continued to grow more playful and adventurous each day. He began teaching his father little games he had learned from Mia, crawling under the table during breakfast or pretending to be a superhero on the living room carpet. Alexander laughed more than he had in years, and each laugh deepened his bond with his son. The rigid man who had believed that life was only about rules and control was beginning to understand a new kind of power, the power of presence, connection, and joy. By the end of the week, Alexander's perspective had shifted significantly. He saw that Ethan's happiness was not a threat to order, but a sign of life and curiosity. He started to allow small freedoms, a longer bedtime story, an extra minute of play, a question asked and answered without interruption. These small acts of trust and attention created a ripple effect. Ethan's confidence grew, and Alexander felt a new sense of pride, not in control or appearances, but in the genuine joyful moments he shared with his son. One evening, as Ethan crawled around the living room pretending to be a brave explorer, Alexander watched quietly. He remembered Mia crawling across the restaurant floor, laughing, teaching without even realizing it. A smile crept onto his face. He understood now that parenting wasn't just about teaching rules or ensuring discipline. It was about sharing moments of wonder, encouraging curiosity, and showing love through attention and patience. Alexander realized that Mia had given him more than just a memorable lunch. She had opened his eyes to the kind of parent he could be. He had witnessed firsthand the power of play, laughter, and genuine human connection. And as he looked at Ethan, crawling around with boundless energy, Alexander knew that he had learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes, the simplest acts like crawling on the floor with a child could change a life forever. Alexander had never felt so conflicted in his life. The more he tried to enforce his rules and maintain order, the more he realized that Ethan and Mia operated in a completely different world. A world of curiosity, laughter, and human connection. It had started innocently enough, a playful moment in the restaurant, a child laughing while a waitress crawled to retrieve a toy. But now, the impact of that moment was clear. Ethan had changed, and Alexander was being forced to face the limits of his own control that morning. Alexander decided to take Ethan to the park. He thought it would be a good opportunity to give his son a structured outing, to guide him on the right paths, and to ensure safety and order. But as soon as they arrived, Ethan's excitement became impossible to contain. He ran straight to the sandbox, his shoes leaving prints on the soft sand, his laughter filling the air. Alexander followed, frowning slightly. "Ethan, stay close," he called, trying to assert control. But Ethan was already halfway across the playground, climbing, jumping, and giggling at the other children. Alexander watched, torn between frustration and amazement. He saw Mia's influence everywhere. Ethan was playing not to dominate or win, but to connect, to explore, to learn through experience. He was asking other children to join his games, sharing toys, helping them build sandcastles, and laughing at their little mistakes. Alexander had never seen his son interact with others so freely. Crouching to watch it land on a flower, Alexander felt a pang of something unfamiliar, envy, perhaps, or regret. He remembered his own childhood, spent in quiet mansions, taught to obey rules, to excel, and to avoid any appearance of weakness. He had rarely been allowed to simply play or laugh without purpose. He realized that he had unintentionally imposed the same strictness on Ethan, and now he was witnessing the joy that came from giving a child freedom, patience, and attention. Later, they went to get ice cream. Ethan wanted to try a new flavor he had never had before, and Alexander hesitated, worried about manners and making a scene. Ethan's eyes sparkled with anticipation. "Dad, please! I want to try it." Alexander sighed but relented. As Ethan savored the ice cream, his face lit up in pure delight. Alexander found himself smiling despite his own reservations. He realized that the lessons Mia had shown him at the restaurant were continuing to unfold. Allowing a child to experience joy fully, even in small, messy ways, was more important than enforcing rules. Back at home, Alexander attempted to help Ethan with his homework. Normally, he would insist on strict adherence to instructions and timelines, correcting every mistake immediately. But inspired by Mia's patient approach, he tried something new. He sat on the floor beside Ethan, letting the boy work at his own pace. He encouraged questions, explored mistakes with curiosity, and praised small successes. Ethan responded with enthusiasm, proudly showing Alexander each completed problem. Alexander felt a deep satisfaction. It's different from the pride of achievement he usually chased. This was the pride of genuine connection. Despite these positive moments, tension remained. Alexander sometimes struggled to reconcile his need for control with the freedom Ethan was discovering. One afternoon, he watched Ethan insist on crawling under the dining table while retrieving a toy. Alexander felt his patience thin. "Ethan, enough. Stop crawling," he barked. Ethan froze, looking hurt and confused. "But Dad, Mia said it's okay to explore," he whispered. Alexander felt a jolt of guilt. He realized that he was repeating his old patterns, trying to suppress the very curiosity and joy that made his son unique. He took a deep breath and instead of scolding, simply watched as Ethan crawled under the table, smiling proudly at his father. That moment, small as it seemed, marked a turning point. Alexander began to understand that discipline did not have to mean stifling creativity and joy. He could guide Ethan without taking away his freedom to explore. The next day, Alexander decided to return to the restaurant where Mia worked. He wanted to thank her properly, but more than that, he wanted to understand how she connected with Ethan so effortlessly. He arrived during the lunch rush and watched from a distance as Mia moved between tables, her calm presence and attentive gestures drawing smiles from children and adults alike. She laughed with them, listened to their stories, and treated each person with respect and warmth. Alexander realized that her power did not come from authority or wealth. It came from empathy and genuine attention. When he approached her, Mia greeted him with the same warmth as before. "Hello, Mr. Grant. Ethan mentioned you might stop by." Alexander nodded, feeling slightly awkward. I just wanted to thank you for how you treated him. He's different, now happier, more confident. I smiled. "I'm glad to hear that. Children need someone to see them, to listen, and sometimes to play along. That's how they learn about the world and about themselves." Alexander was struck by her words. He realized that he had been so focused on teaching Ethan about rules, manners, and control that he had overlooked the most important lesson: being present, paying attention, and valuing his child's perspective. Mia's influence had revealed a side of parenting he had never experienced. Back at home, Alexander tried to implement what he had learned. He allowed Ethan to lead small activities, encouraged imaginative play, and refrained from correcting every minor misstep. He noticed that Ethan's confidence grew with each day, and with it, Alexander's own patience and understanding deepened. He even found himself laughing along with his son, something he hadn't done in years. However, challenges remained. Alexander's business demanded attention, and old habits of control crept back. He caught himself becoming critical over small things, snapping at Ethan to behave properly. Each time he reminded himself of Mia's example: patience, empathy, presence. Gradually, he learned to step back, observing rather than controlling, guiding rather than dictating. One afternoon, while walking in the park, Ethan ran ahead to join a group of children playing a game he had invented. Alexander paused, watching. The children laughed and included Ethan, responding to his leadership and creativity. Alexander saw that his son was not just happy, he was learning valuable social skills, empathy, and confidence. The lessons Mia had imparted at the restaurant were manifesting in real life. By the end of part 3,
Alexander's
understanding of parenting had shifted profoundly. He recognized that allowing Ethan freedom and joy did not weaken his authority. It strengthened their bond and nurtured his son's growth. Alexander began to embrace a new philosophy. Life was not only about control, wealth, or appearances. True influence came from empathy, connection, and presence. He also began to see Mia differently. She was more than a kind waitress. She was a teacher in her own way, showing him and Ethan how to engage with the world authentically. Alexander realized that the lessons she offered were not limited to childhood, they applied to life, relationships, and even business. Patience, empathy, and attention were powerful tools. More effective than fear or strict rules, Ethan, unaware of the depth of the transformation in his father, continued to thrive. His laughter filled the house, his imagination expanded, and his confidence grew. Alexander began to cherish these moments, understanding that the small, playful acts, crawling on the floor, laughing at mistakes, exploring freely, were the moments that shaped character and nurtured joy. By observing his son and reflecting on Mia's example, Alexander learned that real change required humility. He could no longer rely solely on his authority, wealth, or rigid rules. Instead, he needed to engage fully, to participate in life alongside his son, and to embrace vulnerability and connection. It was challenging, unfamiliar, and sometimes uncomfortable, but it was also transformative. as part 3 drew to a close. Alexander sat in his study late one night, watching Ethan sleep peacefully in his bed. He reflected on the past few weeks, the restaurant, the park, the small acts of play and attention, and realized how far he had come. He understood that parenting was not about control, but about guidance, empathy, and shared experience. And he knew that the lessons Mia had introduced would continue to shape him and Ethan for years to come, preparing them both for a life filled with joy, connection, and love. Alexander had begun to notice changes not only in Ethan, but also in himself. It was subtle at first, small moments that went almost unnoticed, but over time, they added up. He no longer felt the constant need to control every situation or correct every minor mistake. He found himself observing Ethan with genuine curiosity instead of judgment, marveling at the child's creativity and courage to explore the world. The lessons from Mia lingered in his mind like a quiet, persistent echo, reminding him that presence, patience, and empathy were more powerful than authority or wealth. One afternoon, Alexander decided to spend the entire day with Ethan, setting aside meetings, calls, and work obligations. He wanted to experience his son's world fully, to let go of schedules and rules and simply enjoy being together. They started at home, building a makeshift fort out of blankets and chairs. Ethan crawled in and out, laughing, pretending to be an adventurer exploring a secret cave. Alexander joined him, crouching under the blankets, letting the boy's imagination lead the way. He realized he had never played like this with Ethan before, not in months, not in years. And yet, as they laughed together, he felt an unexpected warmth, a connection that no wealth or status could ever create. Later, Ethan insisted on baking cookies. Normally, Alexander would have imposed rules, measuring ingredients perfectly, cleaning every spill immediately, and ensuring everything was orderly. But today was different. He handed Ethan the ingredients and stepped back. Flour ended up on the counter, sugar spilled onto the floor, and chocolate chips scattered everywhere. Ethan giggled, sneaking a few chips into his mouth. Alexander caught himself laughing instead of scolding. He realized that allowing Ethan to make a mess, to explore, and to take small risks was teaching him independence, creativity, and confidence. During the baking, Ethan began to talk about Mia. She says, "Being kind and playful makes people happy, and I want to be like her dad." Alexander listened quietly. He felt a pang of gratitude toward her, realizing that she had not only influenced his son but also nudged him toward a new way of seeing life. He remembered her crawling across the restaurant floor, the laughter, the patience, the genuine connection. Those small acts had sparked a chain of changes that were now unfolding in his home. In the afternoon, Alexander suggested they take a walk in the neighborhood. As they strolled, Ethan ran ahead, stopping to examine flowers, greet neighbors, and interact with other children. Alexander watched, noticing how confident and self-assured his son had become. He remembered times when he had been embarrassed by Ethan's curiosity in public. Now he felt a sense of pride rather than shame. Ethan was learning social skills, empathy, and confidence, all through play and exploration. Alexander realized that Mia had demonstrated a powerful truth. Children learn best when they feel safe, seen, and valued. Later that day, Ethan asked Alexander to play a new game and obstacle course he had invented using furniture, cushions, and toys. Alexander hesitated for a moment, considering the potential mess and chaos, but then smiled and agreed. He crawled under tables, jumped over cushions, and laughed alongside Ethan. Each tumble, each playful challenge deepened their bond. Alexander noticed something profound: the joy of fully engaging with his child, of surrendering control, was more fulfilling than any business deal or achievement he had ever experienced. That evening, Alexander decided to reflect on his own childhood. He remembered long days spent in silent luxury, lessons in etiquette, achievement, and perfection. He realized that while he had learned discipline and ambition, he had missed the lessons of connection, curiosity, and joy that Mia was now teaching Ethan. He felt a twinge of regret, but also hope. He had the chance to do things differently, to guide his son not only toward success, but also toward happiness, confidence, and empathy. Over the next few days, Alexander continued experimenting with this new approach. He allowed Ethan to choose activities, make small decisions, and express himself freely. When Ethan spilled juice or built a tower that toppled, Alexander resisted the urge to scold. Instead, he offered encouragement and problem-solving advice, turning mistakes into learning opportunities. Ethan responded with enthusiasm and joy, proud of his accomplishments and unafraid to take risks. Alexander realized that by letting go of control, he was nurturing resilience and creativity in his son. One evening, as they played with toy cars on the living room floor, Alexander noticed a pattern in Ethan's behavior. He was imitating Mia's gestures and words, speaking kindly to his toys, and including imaginary friends in his games. Alexander felt a deep sense of admiration for Mia's influence. She had demonstrated that simple acts of kindness, attention, and play could transform a child's outlook and confidence. Alexander began to understand that these lessons applied not only to parenting but also to life itself. Empathy, patience, and connection were more powerful than control or authority. Alexander also started to notice changes in himself. He felt more relaxed, more patient, and more willing to embrace uncertainty. He laughed more freely, allowed small imperfections, and discovered joy in simple moments. Observing Ethan's happiness reminded him of what he had been missing in his own life. He realized that true fulfillment came not from wealth, power, or status, but from connection, presence, and shared experiences. One afternoon, Alexander took Ethan to the local park again. Ethan ran straight to the playground, inviting other children to join his games. Alexander watched silently, noticing how confident, empathetic, and imaginative his son had become. Ethan was not simply playing. He was learning leadership, social skills, and problem-solving, all while having fun. Alexander felt a deep sense of pride, realizing that Mia's influence had sparked a transformation not only in Ethan, but also in himself. That evening, Alexander called Mia. "I just wanted to thank you," he said. "Not just for what you did at the restaurant, but for how you've influenced Ethan. And me, I think I'm beginning to understand what you were teaching." Mia smiled warmly. "I'm glad, Mr. Grant. Sometimes the smallest acts play, patience, attention, can make the biggest difference. Children and even adults learn best when they feel seen and valued." Alexander nodded, feeling gratitude and humility. He realized that parenting was not about control or authority. It was about presence, empathy, and shared experience. As the weeks went on, Alexander and Ethan developed a new routine. They played, explored, and learned together. Alexander allowed Ethan to take the lead in games, encourage creativity, and make small choices. In turn, Ethan responded with confidence, joy, and trust. Alexander noticed that their bond had grown stronger than ever before. He was no longer simply a father who enforced rules. He was a partner in exploration, a guide, and a friend. By the end of Part 4, Alexander had transformed significantly. He understood that wealth and authority could not teach the lessons Mia had shown through play and connection. He realized that the true measure of parenting in life was not control or perfection, but empathy, presence, and shared joy. Alexander had begun to embrace a new philosophy, one that allowed him to guide his son while nurturing creativity, confidence, and happiness. Ethan, unaware of the depth of this transformation, continued to thrive. He laughed, explored, and learned, growing more confident and joyful every day. Alexander observed him with pride, understanding that the moments they shared, crawling under tables, building forts, baking cookies, were shaping Ethan into a resilient, kind, and happy child. Alexander knew that this change was only the beginning. He had learned that parenting required humility, patience, and openness. By embracing Mia's lessons, he had discovered a new way to connect with his son and experience life. He understood that joy, curiosity, empathy were not just important, they were transformative that night. As Anta fell asleep, Alexander reflected on the journey so far. He remembered the restaurant, the playground, the laughter, and the small acts of care that had changed everything. He realized that parenting in life itself was about presence, connection, and love. And for the first time in a long time, he felt truly hopeful for the future. Knowing that he and Ethan were building a life filled with joy, trust, and discovery, the weeks that followed had changed Alexander in ways he had never imagined. The small lessons from that restaurant, the laughter, the crawling on the floor, and the gentle, playful care of Mia had slowly begun to reshape not only his approach to parenting, but his understanding of life itself. He was no longer the rigid, distant father who measured everything by rules, appearances, and success. He had discovered a new world, a world full of curiosity, joy, and connection, guided by his son's energy and Mia's example. Ethan was thriving. His laughter echoed through the house like music. His imagination seemed limitless, and his confidence had grown beyond anything Alexander had expected. He no longer hesitated to express himself, ask questions, or explore the world around him. Alexander noticed that every day his son's social skills were improving. He shared toys, helped others, and even comforted small children and pets with a gentle care that reminded Alexander of Mia. It was clear that the lessons Ethan had learned from play and attention were lasting and transformative. One afternoon, Alexander decided to organize a small adventure at home. He brought out a collection of old boxes, blankets, and cushions, encouraging Ethan to design an adventure fort. Ethan's eyes lit up with excitement. He crawled, jumped, and explored, constructing tunnels, secret rooms, and imaginary spaces. Alexander joined him eagerly, crawling alongside his son, laughing at the creative chaos. For the first time, Alexander realized that these moments, messy, playful, imperfect, were more meaningful than any business meeting or deal he had ever completed. During this playtime, Ethan spoke about Mia again. "Dad," Mia says, "that when we play, we learn courage and kindness. She says we should always try to help others and enjoy every moment." Alexander listened quietly, feeling a deep gratitude for the woman who had unknowingly become a teacher in their lives. He realized that Mia had given him more than a lesson in parenting. She had given him a model of living with presence, empathy, and joy, inspired. Alexander began to take these lessons beyond playtime. He started noticing the small things around him, the chirping of birds, the patterns of clouds, the laughter of children in the street. He spent more time listening to Ethan, asking questions about his thoughts and feelings, and allowing the boy to express himself fully. Alexander's own life felt lighter, more colorful, and filled with small, meaningful moments that he had previously overlooked. One evening, Alexander invited Mia over to their home. He wanted Ethan to show her the forts, games, and adventures they had been creating together. Mia arrived with her warm smile, and Ethan ran to greet her with boundless excitement. Alexander watched as his son shared stories, demonstrated games, and laughed freely, completely unself-conscious in her presence. It was a revelation for Alexander. The simple acts of kindness, patience, and play that Mia had introduced had blossomed into a confidence and joy in Ethan that was now visible to everyone. As the evening progressed, Alexander felt a shift within himself. He realized that parenting was no longer about control or authority. It was about guidance, presence, and trust. He could teach his son values and lessons without stifling creativity or joy. Alexander laughed more than he had in years, joining Ethan and Mia in games, listening to stories and celebrating small achievements. He felt a bond with his son that was deeper and more meaningful than any formal lesson could have created. Over the next few days, Alexander continued to integrate these changes into his daily life. He encouraged Ethan to take small risks, explore new interests, and express his creativity freely. He celebrated mistakes as learning opportunities rather than failures. Ethan responded with increased confidence, curiosity, and empathy. Alexander noticed that even the smallest victories, Ethan helping a neighbor, completing a creative project, or simply laughing without inhibition, brought him a sense of fulfillment that surpassed any professional success. One afternoon, as they walked through a quiet park, Alexander observed Ethan interacting with other children. Ethan encouraged them, shared toys, and included shy children in games. Alexander felt a swell of pride and gratitude. He understood that the foundation of these behaviors was built on presence, empathy, and playful guidance, the very lessons Mia had shown at the restaurant and continued to influence in their daily lives. He realized that parenting was not about perfection or control. It was about nurturing, guiding, and connecting. Later that week, Alexander held a small family dinner. He invited close friends and family, but instead of controlling the event perfectly, he allowed Ethan to take part in the planning and activities. Ethan helped set the table, suggest games, and even lead a storytelling session. Guests laughed and joined in, enjoying the playful energy that filled the room. Alexander realized that the confidence, joy, and leadership his son demonstrated were direct results of the freedom, attention, and empathy he had learned to provide. Alexander also reflected on his own personal growth. He had become more patient, more empathetic, and more attuned to the people around him. He noticed that business negotiations, interactions with colleagues, and even friendships had improved because he was now listening more, responding with understanding, and valuing connection over control. He realized that Mia's influence extended far beyond parenting. It had taught him a new way to approach life entirely. Ethan continued to grow, exploring new hobbies, developing social skills, and expressing his creativity freely. Alexander felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He understood that true success was not measured in wealth, status, or appearances, but in the ability to nurture, connect, and create joy in the lives of those he loved. Watching Ethan thrive, laugh, and explore was a daily reminder of this truth. One morning, Ethan approached Alexander with a small notebook. "Dad, I wrote a story about Mia and me," he said proudly. Alexander read the story, smiling at the playful descriptions, the lessons learned, and the joy captured in every line. He realized that his son was not only learning values, but also expressing himself creatively, building confidence and resilience through storytelling and imagination. Alexander realized that the transformation was complete. He had shifted from a father who demanded obedience to a parent who guided, nurtured, and connected. He had learned that love, attention, and empathy were far more powerful than rules, control, or wealth. The bond he now shared with Ethan was deeper than anything he had experienced before, filled with laughter, trust, and shared exploration in the evenings. Alexander often sat quietly, watching Ethan play or read, reflecting on the journey they had taken together. He remembered the lunch at the restaurant, Mia crawling on the floor, and the joy that had sparked a change in both father and son. He realized that life's most important lessons often came from the simplest moments, the unplanned encounters, and the willingness to be present and open-hearted by the end of this journey. Alexander had transformed into a father who embraced life fully alongside his son. He encouraged curiosity, celebrated joy, and nurtured confidence. He understood that true parenting required humility, patience, and presence. Ethan, in turn, had grown into a happy, confident, and empathetic child, thriving in an environment filled with love, play, and guidance. Mia's influence remained a quiet but powerful presence in their lives. She had shown both father and son the value of play, empathy, and genuine connection. Alexander often reflected on how a single act of kindness scrawling across a restaurant floor to engage with a child could spark a transformation that touched hearts, changed behaviors, and created lasting bonds in the final moments of each day. As Ethan drifted off to sleep, Alexander felt a profound sense of peace and gratitude. He had learned that wealth and authority were meaningless without love, presence, and connection. He had discovered the joy of being a parent who participates fully in his child's life, guiding and nurturing rather than controlling. And most importantly, he had witnessed the transformative power of simple, human acts of care lessons that would shape his family for years to come. The bond between father and son had become unbreakable, strengthened by laughter, shared adventures, and the gentle guidance of a woman who had unknowingly changed their lives forever. Alexander understood that true change often began in small, unexpected moments, and that embracing joy, empathy, and presence could transform not just a child, but an entire family. As the sun set, Alexander watched Ethan play one last time, crawling under the table with a toy car, laughing freely and unselfconsciously. A smile spread across Alexander's face. He finally understood that life's greatest lessons were not learned from wealth or authority, but from connection, kindness, and the willingness to be present. And in that moment, he knew that everything had changed for Ethan, for himself, and for the life they would share together.